Hey everybody, welcome back to Vanland. So today I'm doing some troubleshooting on the electrical system on this van right here. The alternator is not charging it properly and we need to get this thing up and running because it's about to go on a multi-week trip. So I thought I would bring you guys along on the journey as we diagnose and attempt to fix this power system, because if you own a van, it's something that ultimately you're going to need to do. So let's dive in and see if we can figure out what's going on. Everything was working just fine on this van not too long ago, but suddenly the alternator stopped charging. And that's a problem with a power system like this because it's 1,000 amp hours of battery storage with a high output 48 volt alternator. And especially if you're going to be doing things like running the air conditioner like this, you're going to need maximum charging. Otherwise the batteries just drain over time. The only other charging method for this van when you're on the road is solar, and that's not going to keep up with all the demands. So we really need to get this alternator working. Something to note about high output secondary alternators with respect to large battery systems like you find in vans like this is that it's one of the more sensitive components in the system. And that's because the alternator is generating a ton of power and you can't just simply send it back to the batteries and charge them without any sort of limiters or regulators on it. And that's usually where the issues come in. So if you just tried to hook an alternator like this directly to the batteries without any controls, you're likely to charge it too quickly. It will overcharge once it gets up to the higher limits, and both of these things are very bad for the batteries. So the power system we're working with on this van is a Volta power system. And it's an interesting system because they divide the whole system into the battery bank and the power distribution hub. So there's not a lot of individual components, or they're actually housed inside one large enclosure. So we don't have access to all the individual components, and that means we need to do some troubleshooting. I've got a list right here of all the things that Volta has asked us to go through in order to figure out what's going on with this alternator. So the first question they ask, and it's important to understand altogether what's going on, are there any other issues with the power system besides the alternator not charging? And I've run through the basic tests and everything else seems to be working. So we're getting charging from shore power, we get charge from solar, the power is being distributed to the 12 volt DC and the 110 volt AC outlets just fine. So it looks like the only thing that's not working right now is the alternator charge. The next two questions are, what is the state of the battery charge and what is the pack temperature, which is the battery pack? And we're able to get both of those pieces of information right here from the display, so these are very easy to figure out. Right now we have about a 72% state of charge, and that'll be perfect. We need it to be below 80 in order for the alternator to kick on, so we're good to go there. And the pack temperature is 73.4 degrees, so we're inside a building right now and it's not hot or it's not cold, so we have a normal operating temperature. Something to note is if you're at a very low state of charge, or if the pack is cold or hot, the alternator might not turn on. So it looks like we're within good operating conditions and it should start up, but it doesn't. So the next thing I'm going to do is go to the vehicle and start it. So with the vehicle on, we should see a little green icon on the screen that tells us that the alternator is connected, and we have not been getting that signal. So it definitely tells me that something is up with the connection from the alternator to the system. The next thing I want to do is go under the van and actually test the alternator itself, because we want to make sure that is in good condition. And there's a number of things that we can run through to see that it is a healthy alternator and that there's not some problem with the physical unit itself. Something we need to check before we go under is just the breaker for this system. So right here we have the breaker for the alternator. So I'm going to click that and then just reset it. Okay, so now we know that the breaker is not tripped. That would be the first most common thing to check for, if the alternator is not working, is the breaker. And on this vehicle, it's right here. Sometimes it's under the vehicle, but yeah, breaker is all good. So the first thing that I'm checking is just the overall condition of the alternator to see if there's any damage or loose bolts or anything like that. And I'm looking here, and this is a new van, so there really hasn't been much wear and tear on it. It should be working fine. I'm looking at the positive and negative connections. Those have markings on them from when they were first installed, and they have not moved at all. So we know we've got good connections on the positive and negative posts. There's no damage to the alternator whatsoever. And then I can go up here and check the belts, and it looks like the tension on that is normal. The belt's in good condition. And I know when I start this up, it is spinning. So no obvious damage to the alternator from the get-go. So we can kind of rule that out. There's the positive post. There's the negative post. There is the belt, which is in good condition as well. So the next thing I need to do here is take a couple of resistance readings. So the first one is going to be from the field wire to the case of the alternator. So I unplugged the little field wire terminal, and where the green wire touches or connects to the alternator here, I'm going to put one of the ends of this here. And I get a reading of 360. So 360 ohms, which I do believe is normal, but I'm going to mark that down. And then the next one I need to do is from the positive terminal to the case. Okay, and that is an open loop, which is good. If this was connected right here, then there would be a short inside the alternator. So we would know that the alternator is actually no good anymore. That would be a bad situation. But right now we get OL, so we're good to go. And then the next thing I'm going to do is put my voltmeter back onto volts. I'm going to start the vehicle and then see that the alternator is putting off the correct voltage. Because obviously we want to first make sure that the alternator itself does not have an issue. If it did, we would probably need to replace it or send it back for repairs, and I would want to pull it out right away and not troubleshoot more. But I do think the alternator is good, so let's start the vehicle and see if it's putting off the correct power. And we're getting 54 volts. So for a 48 volt alternator, 54 volts is perfect. Okay, so now that we know the alternator is actually functioning correctly, the next thing we need to test are some of the connections within the power system that actually get the alternator to send a charge back to the battery bank. And the first big one is the engine run signal. So this comes from under the seat, and essentially what it's doing is it's telling the alternator control system to go ahead and connect it to the power system only when the engine is running. So we pulled off the seat here. Now I'm in here testing the terminal. It's actually this yellow wire here that this is connected to. So I just want to make sure when the vehicle's running that we're getting good power to this wire. Okay, so when got the vehicle running, we're getting 14.7 volts, and that would be a good signal. So we know that this wire here, which runs back to the power bank, is getting the correct voltage. So we're going to go back at the power bank and check to see if the signal is getting all the way back there, as well as some other things. But we are good to go here. So this is the Volta battery bank. So right here we have the large power distribution hub, which has all of the chargers and converters in it. And then in the back is the actual power pack. So there's a lot going on in here, but it's pretty well organized, and I know a bit about these systems, so we should be able to figure out what's going on. So there's quite a few different things to test here, but what we're really looking for is just to make sure that the power from the engine run signal is getting back here, as well as the power from the alternator when it's running. So we would start by testing out the main power wires here. And those are at 54 volts. So we know the battery pack is at a good voltage. It should be accepting a charge right now. And then down connected to the power distribution pack here, there is a harness that has a bunch of wires in it. Looks to be about 12 wires. And this power system is very accessible, but taking the readings is not quite as easy as I wish it would be. It would be nice if they had a small terminal in here that all of the wires ran into that was really accessible and also easy to read, like what wires are connected to which of these little connector points. So that you could quickly test everything without having to stick your arms in and move them around. And also the wires are quite small, so it's sometimes difficult to know whether or not you're getting a good reading because we're essentially back probing them and you don't have great visual access to it. But enough about all that, we still have to test it anyways. So I'm going to start testing some of the different wires to see if I can find any anomalies. So it does seem like everything is working properly as far as I can tell, except we're not getting the engine run signal that we tested under the seat back here at the power pack. So if you don't get that signal, it will not charge. It's basically, there's nothing to tell the regulator in here that the van is running. And if the van is not running, it's definitely not going to connect to the alternator. So this makes sense based on everything we're seeing. It was working properly at one point. We're no longer getting either any power coming into the power pack, but also we're not getting the signal or the little green icon on the display, which tells me that the alternator is not connecting to the system. And the way that it does that is through the engine run signal. So I'm going to kind of dig through some of these wires. I've already been through them once, but I'm going to look through again and see if we can figure out where the connection might have broken, because we know we're getting power up under the seat, but we're not getting power back here. So unfortunately, this is maybe a 12 or 15 foot long wire, and some of it is buried behind the walls. I'm not going to be able to check it all, but let's see if we can figure out within this pack, where it might be. So this is the engine run signal, and they did a good job of labeling everything, so we actually know this is the wire where the signal should be coming in. So let me go ahead and disconnect this and then test it. Okay, so right now we're getting a good signal from the engine. And I'll test this one back here. So on this side of the terminal, oh, sorry, that would be a mistake. I need to plug it in for the signal to come through. Okay. Yeah, so on this side of the terminal here, we are not getting the correct run signal. Interesting. There's a pin inside here
if I can pull it out. There we go. And it didn't seem like it was, oh yeah, look at that. If you can, it was pulled back. So something was up. I think this might be the issue. See that little, let me put this down. So this pin right here, on the inside, it was pulled back about maybe 1/4 inch. And the pin on this side, the male, is only about 1/4 inch long. So this is the signal that we need to make sure it's working, and that could have been the issue right there. So I'm going to push it all the way in. Now it's up further. And I'll go ahead and put this in, which should lock it into place, but it was moving quite easily, so I'm a little skeptical. Pop that in. And then go ahead, connect those together, making sure that everything is nice and firm there. Okay. All right, I'm going to keep looking, but that could have been an issue. Yeah, it is pretty hard to see in here. A couple times I've had to pull these harnesses completely out and bring them outside because there's so many wires that go into the same harness, and they have these teeny tiny little numbers or letters on them to tell what they are, and it's impossible to tell in there. So unless you've worked on this type of system 100 times, you really need to go in and check that the number corresponds with the wire. So what I've had to do is pull the harness out. Unfortunately, that shuts down the power to the whole system. Then I have to bring in lights and a magnifying glass to check the terminals. If you're a pro at this and you have it memorized, you can probably figure it out just by the wire color. But even still, there's maybe 12 to 15 little wires all in the same terminal. So even if you can see the colors, you might not be able to see if it has a stripe on it, or some of the colors look very similar. So again, it's just a lot of tedious work to kind of figure out and get all of your testing points. But I think we're pretty much through them. And the main thing I'm seeing is that there's no engine run signal. So let me go ahead and restart the whole system, make sure the van is running, and see if it is going to solve the issue. Okay, breakthrough. So we have not had the alternator light on for like the past 2 weeks since we've been testing this and trying to figure out what's wrong. So that means that the engine run signal is now getting to the power pack, and we need to rev up the engine. This particular alternator does not charge at idle. It needs about 1500 RPM, so we're going to rev it up, and then I'll be able to come back here and check to see if we're getting power. And we are. All right. That's it. We figured it out. It was one of the terminals, I'm almost positive in the back, that we pushed closer together. There was a little bit of separation between them, and we were not getting the correct signal to start up the alternator. But now that we are, we're getting the green icon. We're getting 1200 watts just at a very low idle right now.
So when this is a positive number, you are getting charging. It's going to start dropping down now because it's actually just shut the alternator down because we're no longer at the correct RPMs. But, so still a little bit more testing to do, but on the road, because I want to make sure that driving over the course of 15 to 30 minutes, we're getting full charge the whole time. But I'm pretty sure that was it. This is basically a brand new van with only a couple thousand miles on it. The alternator's good, the power pack's good. So just goes to show you guys, sometimes it can be very small issues, like one little wire and two little connectors that just weren't making a connection, and that shut down the whole charging system. So hopefully this helped you guys. There could be a number of other things that this might have been. Obviously, with the worst case scenario being a shorted out alternator or an alternator that has burned out. And I have seen those before. So be careful when you're testing these things. If you have a short, you can have an electrical current running through it. There's a lot of bad things that can happen. If you're unsure about any of this stuff, you should always take it to a professional who knows what they're doing and can run the correct tests. But we take care of a lot of different types of power systems and alternator combinations. And I've seen it many times before. They don't always work exactly how you think they're going to, and they're not 100% reliable. So it's worth getting to know the system, spending a little time figuring out where you can take your test measurements, and then most importantly, just knowing how the whole system works so that you can figure out in your head what's wrong before you go spending a bunch of time troubleshooting. All right, guys, if you have any questions about how alternators work, please leave them in the comments below. I'd be happy to help you. Again, they are complex systems and they put out a lot of power, so you need to be careful and you need to know what you're doing. Thanks for watching, everybody. We'll see you again next time.